this short Q&A. And Kirk Schulz, I'd like to start with you. First and foremost, tell us why Teresa Gould was the choice by you and Oregon State to be the next commissioner of the Pac-12.
Well, thanks, Yogi. Great question. And as we knew that George was going to be departing after his tenure as our commissioner, we talked to our athletic directors, we talked to other people in the sports world, if you will, about, what should we be thinking of, coming up next. And everybody we talked to said, hey, you got the right person right in-house. Who has wonderful, terrific campus experience, on the West Coast, as well as long-term Pac-12 executive experience, and it's got some great ideas for the future and where she would like to take our conference in this sort of rebuilding mode that we find ourselves in. So it was a really easy choice. J.T. Murthy, the president of Oregon State, and I had a chance to spend about an hour just talking with Teresa about her thoughts, her concerns, what she was thinking. And it was an engaging conversation that wasn't just about nuts and bolts, but is a little bit about the future. How do we position the conference well and those types of things? And we knew we had the right person. So it didn't take us long to negotiate a contract. And we're just thrilled that Teresa has stepped up at a really challenging time for intercollegiate athletics to lead us over the next several years.
Yeah, well said. And I'll add a tremendous competitor. So Teresa, first and foremost, why did you accept the job after that conversation that was just described? And can you lay out your responsibilities and priorities now as the commissioner of the Pac-12?
Sure, Yogi. And Yogi, I want to thank you for being here today. It's great to have you with us in this special moment today. So in terms of why I took the job, I think it's important for folks to know a little bit in general about my why and why I got into this industry 35 years ago. And when I decided to pursue a career in intercollegiate athletics, the reason I did that was because I believe so passionately about the role that athletics can play in the context of higher education and the role that intercollegiate athletics can play in the lives of young people and developing our young people as leaders. So the reason I took this job, Yogi, is ever since everything transpired in the Pac-12 back in August, there hasn't been a night that has gone by that I haven't thought about the more than 1,000 student athletes on the campuses of Oregon State and Washington State. There are more than 1,000 young people, men and women, who went to those two campuses with dreams of competing at the highest level, competing for national championships, and having a great student athlete experience. And all I could think about was that they need a leader that is prepared to fight for them, a leader that's prepared to fight on their behalf. And I want to be that leader. And I was really inspired and convicted and motivated to really come in and say, look at the programs on those two campuses and what they have done. Look at, like, just this year alone, Oregon State men's soccer competing in the College Cup. We've got Kyle Smith and the Cougs competing for a regular season men's basketball championship as we speak this week. We've got a football program at Oregon State that finished in the top 20 in the CFP rankings. We have programs on these two campuses that compete at the highest level. And I wanted to be the leader that fought on behalf of those student athletes and their future.
Yeah, you've always been that. Can you lay out some of your responsibilities and how you're gonna, lead and guide this thing moving forward within this conference?
Absolutely. So when I think about this role and coming into the leadership role as the commissioner of the Pac-12 during such a transformational and unique time, I really think of the job in terms of three different pieces and three core responsibilities. I think in the short term, it will be critical that moving forward in the coming weeks, that I build an organization and an operation that can collaborate and support Oregon State and Washington State in terms of the normal high-level Autonomy 5 services that their student athletes and programs have been accustomed to receiving. right? There are certain things from a conference office that those programs need to support their programs, and I need to build that organization. I need to retain and recruit the best talent, the people that are in this for the right reasons to support that student athlete mission, and make sure that by July 1, we have an operation in place that's prepared to support the needs of those two campuses moving forward for their programs. So I think that's the first component and something that will happen in the coming weeks. The second piece of it, Yogi, in my mind, is really around representing Oregon State and Washington State and the Pac-12 conference on the national stage. So as the commissioner of this league, I sit on the CFP management committee. I meet regularly with the A5 and the FBS commissioners and all of the NCAA commissioners. I'll be engaging with President Charlie Baker from the NCAA. So there is a portion of this job that is really around advocacy and representation and making sure that I'm utilizing the seat at the table that we have to support their future and advocate for the future of this industry. I would say the third piece, and probably the most important piece in terms of impact and importance, is the strategic piece around forging the future for these two programs. That strategic piece, and really being bold and being aggressive, being intentional, and really attacking these challenges head on, but also being open-minded and making sure that we're considering all options. That is probably the most important and urgent piece of my role, is to partner with the leadership on both campuses to forge that future path for their two campuses and their athletic programs.
Bold, aggressive, strategic, and open-minded. So, okay, Kirk, where do you and Oregon State want to end up? Is it the ultimate goal to be in a power conference, or is it rebranding the Pac-12 in some form? What does that look like from your lens, and what is the timeline that you may have talked about internally along with Oregon State?
You know, Yogi, there's no specific timeline, and I want to make that clear because I think a lot of people out there want to know, what are you going to have done by a particular certain date? And I think as we've gone through, from August till today, we've tried to be careful to say, let's keep ourselves flexible. Let's make sure that we're keeping lots of options open for both institutions and for the conference, and not rush to a decision just because people feel some anxiety about how come we don't know today what the future is going to look like. And I think we've done that successfully and really prepared ourselves well. What we want to do, though, is map out some pathways. And of course, if you look out in the sports media world, on X or your favorite Instagram, whatever, lots of ideas about what the Pac-12 should be doing. Our two institutions want to provide opportunities for our student athletes to compete at an elite level, like we have been doing. Like Teresa mentioned, the success on the court and in the classroom of both Oregon State and Washington State, I think it's undeniable on a national level. So how do we continue to make sure we still have those opportunities for our student athletes? Personally, though, I moved out to the West Coast 8 years ago. I love the West Coast sports scene. And I think it's really important that we have a top-tier conference on the West Coast that is for all sports, that allows our student athletes to compete at a really high level, and means that we also can manage travel and things like that, not just from an expense point of view. People talk about that too often, but the impact on student athlete performance, the impact on their classroom performance. And guess what? Somebody comes to Washington State or Oregon State to participate in our community, be part of Pullman, be part of Corvallis. They're not interested in being part of something on the East Coast or in the Midwest. And I think we just got to keep that as a core principle in mind. How do we build? How do we grow? What's our vision look like? And let's do it on the West Coast, where that's our footprint. That's our psyche. That's all part of being a member of the Pac-12, and it's important to keep that alive and thriving moving forward.
All right, I'm going to ask one more, and then we'll open it up to the general media. Teresa, we talked a lot about competing at the highest level. You referenced Oregon State in the top 20 in the CFP. Washington State was top 15 in the AP poll at one point last season. And of course, every day, seems like every hour, there's talk around the CFP. Teresa, from your lens, because you've recently just been in the meetings, where does Oregon State and Washington State fit into that future with so much change happening seemingly every day?
Yeah, that's a great question, Yogi, and I appreciate it, particularly given the importance that football plays on both of our campuses and the success that those two programs have had. And I first just want to thank Kirk for his, service on the CFP board. And, we're glad that we have the format and the particulars of 2024 and 2025 resolved. In part because of the great work that's been done there by the CFP Management Committee and the board. Now our attention is really turning to the years beyond that, right? 2026 and beyond. And there are a number of important discussions that are currently taking place. As you suggested, Yogi, I've only been to one meeting. My first meeting was last week, and I was welcomed into that room, and I look forward to being an active participant in those discussions. But there are a lot of different options and models on the table. It certainly has been talked about a lot this week and widely reported in the media. But just to be clear, we are very much in the infancy stages of talking about what happens beyond 2026. We are not discussing, one model or one option. We're looking at many and having a lot of different discussions about what that format and access looks like, how that revenue will be shared, how we will govern ourselves. All of those discussions are in the very, very early stages. My role in that and my goal in that, not knowing where Oregon State and Washington State are going to land post 2026, is to make sure that, number one, they have reasonable access based on what they competitively earn on the field. So I think that's priority number one on behalf of our student athletes. Number two, that they're treated fairly in terms of the revenue distribution. And I think the goal in that, Yogi, is really to make sure that the competitive balance that we are experiencing in college football continues, not just for our fans, but for our student athletes.
Appreciate both of you answering those questions. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over now to Pac-12's head of communication, Andrew Walker. He will help conduct the media Q&A session. Andrew?
Great. Thank you, Yogi. And as a reminder, media can select the raise hand tab at the bottom of your screen in order to be added to the queue. When selected to ask a question, please be sure to unmute yourself and to identify yourself by full name and media outlet. We'll get started. We have a question from Michelle Smith. Go ahead, Michelle.
Unmuting. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Couple of questions. As we cited the success of the two programs, I want to talk about our female student athletes and how important moving forward and the way that we move forward impacts our female student athletes who are obviously haven't been part of a lot of these female sports programs that are seminal in this conference and have been historically haven't really been part of this discussion because it's been so football centric. So that's one. And the second one is about, and maybe Kirk can respond to this one as well because he's on the ground, recruiting with this 2-year period of time. Keep holding on to your coaches, holding on to student athletes in the era of the transfer portal without obviously knowing too much what the future looks like and how that is going to be handled.
I'm happy to take the first part of that, Kirk, and then I'll kick it to you to talk about the coaches' retention. So first, Michelle, thank you for being on. It's nice to see you. I look forward to seeing you in Vegas next week. So just to talk a little bit about our women's programs and where they fit in all of this. Clearly, one of the things that I really love about the Pac-12 is our commitment to breadth and opportunities for women's sports and our Olympic sports. And I think Washington State and Oregon State have certainly been leaders in that regard. I'm anxiously awaiting the NCAA women's basketball top 16 reveal tonight. I know Oregon State was in it the last time. We're optimistic that they'll stay in it this time. Certainly the Washington State women's basketball won our tournament last year in an exciting fashion. And there's so many examples on both campuses of highly successful women's sports. And I think the place for me that they play as we think forward to our strategy is separate from the economics, although I do think that women's sports has a lot of financial upside and we need to invest in them, we need to grow them, we need to look at them as a product that our fans want to view. But I think, Michelle, we really need to be thoughtful as we think forward to what all of the various options are for the future conference affiliation to make sure that it's also an option that is an appropriate home for our women's sports and our Olympic sports. Both campuses and institutions have invested heavily in those sports and they've reaped the success of that. Anything that we do moving forward in terms of conference affiliation and whatever models we look at are going to also have to work for those other sports and support their success.
Yeah, well said, Teresa. In terms of sort of recruitment and coach retention, we've been fortunate at Washington State thus far. If I look at football as an example, we only had a few of our students go into the portal. And it surprised us. It surprised our staff as much as anybody else. But if I talk to our coaches, they emphasize that, hey, you can get more money or NIL dollars at other places, but they have really well-established relationships with the student athletes, and they all sort of feel that they're going to roll up their sleeves and make something special happen. I wish it was something that was in the water in Pullman I could point to, but it really comes down to our coaches on both universities and the culture that they build, in addition to some of those other resource pieces. Thus far, we were really pleased with the student athlete classes that we signed for our fall sports going into the spring practices in last year. And, are there some that might have decided to go elsewhere because they don't know what conference we're going to be competing in? I'd be naive to say none of that happened, but not to the extent that all of us really feared. So I think the culture of the institution, the facilities, the quality of the coaches, all of that kind of rolled up together. Now, at the end of the day, we're not likely to have the same revenue package coming in to support Cougar athletics in out years that we've enjoyed when the heyday of larger media packages in the Pac-12. So, we're going to have to make some adjustments in our budget and what we pay and things like that. But we don't feel we have to do those overnight. We can take our time and do them in a measured fashion because we want a sustainable athletics program that is excellent on and off the field. But we also recognize that we have to be realistic about what our revenue looks like coming in. And our coaches have been part of these conversations internally. We haven't kept them out of it. We've wanted them to be an integral part of it. And I think that's going to be what it's like moving forward.
Next question, we've got John Canzano. Go ahead, John.
Hi, thank you. One of the coaches of one of your programs said that as a silver lining, you've got more people than ever tuned into what Washington State and Oregon State are about to do. You've got a plan for sports with the Mountain West Conference and the WCC moving forward, but how do you plan to draw a distinction publicly between yourselves and maybe the WCC and Mountain West as others want to group you with them because you're playing them more often?
Teresa's looking at me, so I guess I got to take that, John. So anyway, nice column this morning, by the way. I would say that this is a fine balance, and I'm very deeply appreciative of the Mountain West and the West Coast Conference for partnering with us in Oregon State for different sports. So, I want to look at it and say, if the positions were reversed, how would I want to be treated and so forth? What I would not want is to bring somebody in who quickly, the first thing they're talking about is leaving and what they can extract or get out of a particular relationship or situation. I just think that's not a good way to work. On the other hand, both those conferences know that we've got a multi-year window here where there's got to be some final landing spot for those two schools. And so I just think we got to keep communications open back and forth. We got to make sure that we don't sort of be, come strutting in there thinking we're just better than everybody else because of where we were before. We'll wind up getting our ass kicked if that happens. But I do think it's really important for us to keep that partnership there, keep the communications open. And, we're counting on Teresa to work with her commissioner colleagues in those two conferences as well on what future partnerships could look like. So I just think you'll see us being careful with language. We want to be respectful to our new conference partners. And we've got to keep our eyes on the horizon on what's best for our two institutions.
All right, we've got a question from Ralph Russo of the Associated Press. Go ahead, Ralph.
Thank you. Congratulations, Teresa, and thank you for doing this, President Schulz. This to both of you, though. Kirk, you've been in the weeds here with the CFP a little longer, so I wouldn't mind, getting your perspective first. But again, if Teresa, you'd like to chime in, what we've seen going on in some of the proposal that I know nothing is done, it does feel a little bit like two particular conferences that are very powerful and wealthy are sort of, imposing their will on the CFP at this point with something of a tiered access system. I guess I would just wonder, what is your level of concern that these conferences with a lot of power might not be acting in the best interest of not just the Pac-12, but of college sports in general?
Teresa, you're in the room on these conversations, so maybe let me throw this one to you, and welcome to being a commissioner. You're like, thanks, Kirk. Yeah.
No, first of all, thank you for the question, Ralph. And we know that, these discussions moving forward in the coming weeks are really critical, not only to our conference in Oregon State and WSU, but really the future of college football. And look, I'm not going to speak specifically to the proposals and the details of the proposals. But what I will say is I think one of the things that we are aligned on in that room that we've talked about is, given all of the seismic change that is happening in this industry that has certainly impacted our conference in Oregon State and Washington State, is that we're committed to making sure that whatever plan we move forward with has adaptability, right? I think none of us would have ever anticipated the amount of change that is going on right now. Yesterday looks different than today, and who knows what the headline is going to be tomorrow. So our job collectively as the leadership of the CFP is to make sure that whatever plan it is, that we have a plan that is adaptable and nimble to the changing times that we're in. And that is one of the conversations that I want to make sure we continue to have in that room, so that above and beyond the details of the format and the revenue distribution and all of that, that we're aligned on, we need to be nimble and prepared to adjust moving forward if the industry continues to change at the rapid rate that it is.
We've got a question from Heather Dinich of ESPN. Go ahead, Heather.
President Schulz, I was wondering what your thoughts are on speculation about the possibility of 2 leagues, 3 leagues, 4 leagues separating from the NCAA. Is that rumor from your presidential colleagues? How real is that? And when you look ahead 8 years, because that's the length of the TV deal that's on the table, what do you think NCAA governance will look like and should look like based on conversations with your peers in other leagues?
Well, Heather, I was, hoping for a simpler question like, what color uniforms are we going to wear against UCLA this week or something. But thanks for the question. There's a lot there. A couple things that I'd like to always point out is that it's easy to throw hand grenades at the NCAA. And I know, schools do, presidents do, lots of people do. But at the end of the day, we need an organization that puts on championships, that does do some rule setting and handles enforcement. And, if you get rid of the NCAA and whatever that looks like, guess what? You got to stand up a separate organization that's going to have those same functions, and it will have some of the same frustrations on. As soon as anybody has to do enforcement, trust me, the school that is being investigated isn't going to feel good about that. And so I think that the idea that we're going to start seeing a bunch of conferences or schools break away from the NCAA and start their own grouping, whatever that is. I think at some point you just recreate the NCAA. Why not reform what's there as opposed to let's go recreate something? Um, my conversations with presidents generally over the last few months have been that we appreciate Charlie Baker coming in as president. Whether people like all the proposals coming out or not, you got to applaud the leadership there saying, hey, we recognize that people want to see something different out of the NCAA, and we're going to respond to that. So I think it's too early also not to give Charlie the opportunity to continue to help lead and modify what the NCAA does and how it works with schools. So I've been really, he took over at a really difficult time with, a not a great perception, let's just say, by the membership. And I've really been impressed with his willingness to tackle hard issues, come out with solutions that are going to cause some controversy. But I applaud his willingness to work across those lines. Bottom line, though, Heather, I think if you don't have the NCAA, you're going to have another organization do that. And let's work with the structure we got instead of just standing up something brand new.
We have a question from Chris Vanini of The Athletic. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, hi, Teresa. Good to see you. Good to see you last week in Dallas. For Kirk, part of the move to the 5+7 in the CFP was the abundance of at-large spots and the importance of that for your two schools. In any future model, how important is it to have enough at-large access?
Well, I can speak just for my institution on this, and then I'll let Teresa speak broader. At the end of the day, what's important for Washington State University and for a football program is access to the playoff. And if we have one of those magical special seasons and we win a lot of football games, we're nationally ranked, I want to make sure that I don't have to sit down with our players and our coaches and say, well, sorry, I know we had a great season and won all these games, but that access is just not there. I think it's really important for us to ensure that when everything goes well, when you got that magical group of student athletes, that everything gels and they excel on the field, we just want that opportunity for them to compete on the field for a championship. Teresa, what would you add?
Yeah, I think, I would reiterate what Kirk said and what I alluded to earlier, which is I think the reason that at-large berths are critical in all sports. I know we're talking about the CFP right now, but across all of our sports where there's a postseason opportunity is so that the student athletes feel like they have a fair shot at competing at the highest level if their competition on the field has earned that, right? They want to feel like they have a fair shake, and like if they achieve at a certain level, they're going to have that access. So I think at-large berths are critically important to the viability of the sport and quite candidly, the fan interest as well.
We've got a question from Dennis Dodd of CBS Sports. Go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome, Teresa. Thank you, President Schulz. Following up on Heather's question, there was a very specific report on ESPN last night that the Big Ten and SEC are having conversations about whether to continue NCAA membership, quoting a source saying those conversations are happening pretty strongly about pulling away, I'd say very strongly. What level of concern do you have specific to that report?
Look, Dennis, first of all, it's nice to have you on. I look forward to talking to you further. Again, I'm not going to comment. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on what may or may not be happening in the Big Ten and the SEC. In terms of concerns, I mean, at this point, all of the A5 commissioners, including me, are very engaged with Charlie Baker as the leadership of the NCAA to talk through the concerns at the A5 level and what that means in terms of the NCAA and the future governance, right? I know Charlie has been working on, and it's been very public, this project Division I and what that means. And all I can say is I feel comfortable right now that the collaboration between Charlie and the A5 commissioners is strong, and that we're attacking concerns head on, and that I'm optimistic that the outcome will be a positive one.
We've got a question from Kyle Bonagura of ESPN. Go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, I got two questions. Teresa, first of all, can you explain what the kind of the terms of your employment are? Is it like a certain amount of years on your contract? Is it structured differently? And then what are the most likely scenarios for televising football in the fall? Thanks.
Hi, Kyle. Nice to have you on. So I have committed to the two institutions to serve in this role for an initial 2-year period. And we agreed on the initial 2-year period based on the agreements and the relationships that they have with the Mountain West for the football scheduling agreement and the West Coast Conference for those affiliate agreements. I think we all felt that that was an important commitment, that I commit to stay through the NCAA grace period and through those two agreements to make sure that we're collaborating and seeing this work through. So my initial commitment is 2 years.
We've got a question from Thomas Klaus. Go ahead, Thomas.
Yes, this is mostly for Kirk. I appreciate you guys having this conference today. But Kirk, recently you had a couple officials from WSU talking to state lawmakers, and the state lawmakers put your athletic department debt at $100 million, and they noted that you have $10 million alone in debt service. So I'm just interested in what's your plan going forward for dealing with that without knowing what the revenue stream will look like, given the fact that the conference is just now two schools.
Yeah, Thomas, thank you. Great question. Over time, as athletics at WSU has overspent its budget internally, we have done the same thing a lot of other institutions have done. We've sort of covered that. And if you look and say, okay, over the last decade or more, how much has that accumulated to? That's $100 million in internal dollars that we've spent to ensure that at the end of the year we have a balanced athletics budget. So certainly that's out there. The $10 million per year that we owe on facilities, it's just like any of us with a car payment or house payment. You can't elect not to do that. So as we look to streamline the Cougar athletics budget in the coming years to reflect different revenue patterns, that's one of the first things that we pay right off the top. That's important for us to do every year. So I don't want anybody thinking that somehow we're going to default on that or not do that. We're building that into our budget models looking forward. And we've made a strong commitment that we can't accumulate more internal debt at WSU. We've got to live within our means for our athletics program. So we're having some tough internal conversations about what that's going to look like. And we're going to be talking with our Board of Regents broadly about this, certainly at our meeting next week. And then we'll have a meeting in April where we'll present publicly what our budget's going to be for the next year, how we're going to manage expenditures, and what that revenue package is going to look like to support Cougar athletics.
Kyle Bonagura just reminded me his second question is related to the plans for football broadcasts in the fall. So if one of our panelists would like to take that one.
I'll jump in on that. And apologies, Kyle. I just saw that in the chat. We'll circle back to that. So I've been partnering with our two athletic directors, Scott Barnes and Pat Chun. And I will say, not surprisingly, there's great interest in the football products at Oregon State and Washington State. So we are working hard to try to consider the options that are on the table to televise all of the home games at Oregon State and Washington State. We know that there are passionate fan bases for both programs all over the country that really want to make sure that they're able to tune in and watch all of those home games. And I think we're hopeful that we'll have an announcement in the near future, but we've been really encouraged about the interest for those media rights.
Next question, we've got Jacob Feldman. Go ahead, Jacob.
Yes, thank you guys so much for doing this. I have two questions. My first is on the conference's intellectual property, the name, the brand. I'm curious what you're planning to use, how you're planning to use those marks and that name starting in the summer. And then my second question, going back to the financials we were discussing recently, I'm curious if what the Pac-12 stance is on potentially bringing in private capital to ensure financial viability in this uncertain period.
Let me maybe first address kind of the intellectual property. And I just want to be clear, starting, July 1, as we continue as a 2-member conference, we are the Pac-12 conference, and we're going to continue to be the Pac-12 conference. That brand means something nationally. It means something in our footprint on the West Coast. It means something to our fan base. So we will continue to own, the name, the logo, and the intellectual property on that. And we think it's definitely an asset that we need to think through moving forward, how we leverage and how that fits into our long-term strategy.
On the second part of the question, too, I think I would say there's certainly been rumors of private equity and other types of financial institutions with a much stronger interest in college sports, particularly college football. If anybody approaches the conference, the board, working with the commissioner, will certainly sit down and want to consider any options that are put on the table. And I think it would be silly at this point to close a door artificially until we'd actually had a chance to understand what the financial impact would be, what the impact would be on our universities, our student athletes, expansion plans, whatever. And so I think we'll always carefully consider proposals from partners and want to just carefully evaluate those. And so right now, I don't have a particular stance one way or the other, as much as happy to have a conversation with anybody to see where we could move forward together.
Got a question from PJ Brown. Go ahead, PJ.
Hi, Teresa. Good to see you. I look forward to seeing you in person next week at the tournament. My question is for you, and I was wondering, as the Pac-12 networks has been so integral in the growth of women's basketball, we've heard a lot of things going forward. A lot of things are swirling. What are your plans for the networks going forward?
It's a great question. And it's nice to see you, and it'll be great to take in some women's basketball with you in Vegas next week, PJ. So the commitment that's been made so far and the decision that's been made by our board is to continue to operate the studio and the facility that we have in Bishop Ranch and in San Ramon for at least next year, for the 2024-2025 academic year. We think that's a really invaluable asset. It's state-of-the-art technology in that facility, and there will be a lot of content that needs to be created and production services that we need to support Oregon State and Washington State. They have, programs that need to be showcased and events that we want to support to tell the great stories of our student athletes on those 2 campuses. So we're going to continue to operate that facility at least for next year, while concurrently thinking about it as a valuable and unique asset moving forward. So as we think about the long-term plan, the studio, the facility, the technology in the facility, the talent that we have in that organization, and obviously the networks as part of that is going to be part of the discussion that we have in terms of long-term, what does it look like? What are the differentiators for us that we can leverage as we think about the future for Oregon State and Washington State? But next year it will be continuing to operate, and we'll be supporting both programs with live events and content.
Okay, we've got time for 3 more questions. We'll go with Alex Simon. Go ahead, Alex.
Hi, yes, Alex Simon from SF Gate. Thank you and congratulations, Teresa. As I know you got a question a little bit about intellectual property and the plan to keep the branding as the Pac-12. At this time, as you look ahead, those 2 schools will basically be members of other conferences in the short term as affiliate members. Is the plan to keep Pac-12 record books alive and keep, I guess, a championship award for the one football game or other uses of the conference branding in the moments that there are still Pac-12 matchups?
That's a great question. And as you alluded to, many of the programs on the Oregon State and Washington State campuses will be affiliate members of the West Coast Conference. So they'll have competition within that conference. They'll be promoted by that conference. They'll have services and support. Student athletes will have access to awards from that conference. But we still look at it as, the Pac-12 is a continuing conference. So we will be keeping records. It's super important that we maintain the legacy of this conference and that we have archives of the history and the current competition in this conference. And I will say, I have strong relationships in both of those conferences, the West Coast Conference and the Mountain West Conference. There's a high level of collaboration, and we're working very closely around what that looks like. I very much view myself as the commissioner of all of these programs. And that doesn't mean that I will play the same role with men's and women's basketball, who will be competing in the West Coast Conference. But I will tell you, in terms of my responsibility to support these programs and add value to those programs, we will still be doing a lot from the center, from the conference, to support all sports. And archiving and documenting and celebrating is certainly a part of that.
Next question, Chris Murray from Nevada Sportsnet. Go ahead, Chris.
This one is for Teresa. As part of the Pac-12 Mountain West Football Scheduling Alliance, I know there was a clause in there that said both sides would engage in quote unquote good faith negotiation toward a full-time merger or reverse merger. I'm just curious if those negotiations have been had and what your opinion would be on the Pac-12 and Mountain West eventually engaging in some kind of a merger.
Thank you, Chris. So let me start just by saying, those conversations haven't started yet, right? We've been very much focused over the last couple months in finding homes for all of our sports. That has been the short-term priority, to make sure that all of the programs on both campuses have a viable home for next year to compete, to have access to postseason, and to deliver a great student-athlete experience. And certainly our conversations with the Mountain West were part of that. And the football agreement was critical in advancing those goals for us. We haven't yet begun these conversations with the Mountain West yet. And I would say, in terms of the future, as we mentioned earlier, our obligation to our programs and our student athletes is to stay open-minded to all options, right? And we really do feel that there are going to be a lot of different options on the table that we need to consider and pursue.
Last question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, President Schulz.
Just to add on to Teresa's answer, I'm looking forward to our fans seeing some additional new football venues. And I know we've got some terrific venues in the Mountain West. We got some terrific locations. It's another thing. It's easy to talk about what's in that contract and have those discussions started. I'm also eager for our fan bases to go to some new places in the West and enjoy coming to Las Vegas, Reno, Hawaii, just go through some of those different places. I think in welcoming some Mountain West programs to Pullman and Corvallis. So I think I'm also looking forward to that. It's easy to get caught up into, what the conferences are going to do together. I think I'm looking forward to hearing from our fans what the fan experience is like, both for some Mountain West fans and some Pac-12 fans in the fall. I think it's going to be great.
And last question, back to Heather Dinich of ESPN. Go ahead, Heather.
For both of you, I was curious just what your general feelings are on 14 teams, because that's been so widely circulated. Forget the format, forget how you get in it, just simply the number 14 team playoff, given that we haven't quite seen what 12 looks like yet. What do you think about that number, 14?
Hi, Heather. Nice to see you. I would say, look, to me, there's no, magic between 12 or 14 or 16 or any number that might be thrown out there. As you can imagine, the devil is in the details around the format, around the schedule, right? We need to continue to make sure that we're protecting the student athletes' academic commitments, that we're talking about impact on the bowl system and the other bowls that we need to keep healthy and viable. But the student athlete experience part of it and what that schedule looks like would be key as it relates to final exams and other academic commitments. But look, in my opinion, we have a very healthy college football product that has more depth and more parity than we've ever had. So I think if the economics and the other considerations support a larger field, it's something that we have to make sure we talk about.
Yeah, as the number gets larger to whatever it eventually winds up landing on, I really do worry about the bowl system. And it's easy for people to point and say, well, the only ones that matter are, a handful of bowls. Having been at both Kansas State and Washington State University, and just think about some of what people would term middle tier bowls that our student athletes have had an opportunity to participate in, our fans have an opportunity to go see a different city, different stadium, play an opponent typically that we don't normally play out of the Big Ten or one of these other conferences. It's easy to be dismissive, but the impact, the positive impact that has on student athletes, families, fans, and the universities, I think sometimes is easily dismissed. And I just worry if we get too large, what does that do to those middle tier bowls that constitute a real nice reward for a fantastic season, but maybe not quite at the level of a Rose Bowl. And I just think all of that's got to be taken into account as we look forward to whatever number the playoff is going to be at the end of the day.